Hello everyone. In the last video we talked about what IPAM is and a little about it, and now in this video let's get actually to work and configure IPAM on Windows Server 2016. I will try to do most of the things with PowerShell, but I will also show you how the interface looks. But I consider that in today's world, knowing how to do most things with PowerShell, in my opinion, is more important than knowing how to do them from the graphical interface. So with this in mind, this is the script that I will use. It's not very big, and I will show you a couple of things that we can do in IPAM. If you want to get the script, you can find it in my GitHub repository that is linked in the description. And with this, let's get going. Now, before we actually go and install IPAM, I first want to run a command on my DHCP servers. And this is the command that I want to run. And the reason is that when you install a DHCP server, it will not contain two important local groups named DHCP users and DHCP administrators. And IPAM needs these groups in order to be able to manage them. And with this command we can create those groups on our DHCP server. So I have two DHCP servers. I will run the command on both of them using invoke command. And it's already done. Now we can go ahead, and the first thing that we have to do is of course install the IPAM feature, like most things that we have to do in Windows. So run the second command, and we have to wait about a minute or so. And now IPAM is installed. If you saw my last video in which we discussed about IPAM, you remember that I told you IPAM is actually integrated in Server Manager. Check it out. With IPAM installed, I just have to refresh. And you see that a new tab popped up. And if I click on it, it takes me actually to my IPAM console. And you don't see too many things because IPAM is just installed, it has not been initialized. But we will get to it very quickly. And actually, let's start. The first thing we have to do is make the IPAM server provisioning steps. With this command, we will tell IPAM, for example, to provision all the servers automatically using group policy, all the servers that it manages, and the group policies that it will create will have a prefix of IPAM. So when we see them in a group policy management, we will see IPAM and a name like IPAM DC, IPAM DHCP for all the rules that it has to create. Let's run the command. It's very quick. You don't have to wait too much time. And it's already done. Also, I did not specify it, but we are using the Windows internal database. In this command, you could also specify an external SQL Server database if you had one. Okay, so next up, we have to tell IPAM that it will manage a specific domain, or actually in our case a specific forest. In our case, the domain is testcorp.local, and I want to manage domain controllers, DNS servers, and DHCP servers. So let's run, and it's done already. Now the next command is used to actually create the group policies that the managed servers will need to be able to be managed. So these group policies contain a lot of firewall rules basically. The only problem is that in my case, in my test environment, I had a problem running it directly from the IPAM server, which in earlier versions of Windows Server did not happen. So just to make sure, I will run it directly from a domain controller. You can do this as well, or try it directly from the IPAM server, and maybe you are lucky. On my domain controller first, I have to install the IPAM PowerShell module, of course, otherwise it doesn't know the command. Again, if you want to try directly to run the command from the IPAM server, just run it, and in case you don't get any error, then it worked for you. Otherwise, do as I do, and for sure you will not have any problems. So under features, we can find IPAM here. And now let's run the command and get back to the IPAM server. This is the command that we have to run. And tell it yes 3 times, because it will create 3 GPOs, and it's already done. And since we are on the domain controller, let me actually show you what this command did. What it did is it created these 3 group policy objects, and it did not only create them, but it linked them directly to the domain. If you are wondering if your computers or servers not related to IPAM will be affected, don't worry, because the way these policies work is that all the IPAM managed servers will be placed in the security filtering list. So only servers in this list will get the DNS rule, for example. So now back to the IPAM server. Now that we have, let's say, the basics done, in the IPAM interface, the next step that we would have to do is start a server discovery, meaning IPAM would scan the boundaries of the domain that you specified for the DC servers, for DHCP servers and DNS servers. When we click this button, it actually runs a scheduled task, so why not run the scheduled task ourselves directly? And you can view the task status with the following command. It will take 2 minutes maybe, or might be even more, so be patient. Run the command from time to time, and when it's done, we will continue. So after some time, you see that the state of the task is ready, so it means that it's done. Let's go back to the IPAM console. And now on point 5, you can see all the servers that IPAM discovered. And we see that it found our 2 domain controllers and our 2 DHCP servers. Okay, so now we have 2 options. We could either, for example, go on each server and configure it to be managed by IPAM, or use PowerShell to set all of them. If you wanted to do it manually, just right click, edit server, and under manageability status, you can just specify it's managed. And now this server is managed. The only problem is that the group policies that we set did not apply yet on it, so it's not really manageable, but we will get to that very soon. Now let's also get to the PowerShell code to do the 3 other servers. And while we are here, actually, let me show you a couple of inventory commands. We can get all the servers that we discovered with this command. You see 4 servers. We can also filter the servers to just select the ones that are not managed yet, and you see we only get 3. And if we have this list, why not also set the IPAM server manageability status to managed. So run the other command, and now the other 3 servers should be managed. Let's see if we refresh. we can see that all of them are managed, and also one of them, it seems, applied very quickly the group policy because it's also manageable with IPAM. This is how it would look in the interface. And I put here one more command. When you use IPAM, of course, you have a nice inventory of servers. Like for example, right now, I got a list of all of my DHCP servers from my environment, which is very easy actually to do. Now, let's get to the unblocking part. So it's very important that group policy runs on all of our servers. And with invoke command, we actually can do it pretty easily. And I am not sure why, but in this list we should have had also DHCP01 and DHCP02. But don't worry, we can add them easily right now and run this command again. So now the group policy has been applied on all 4 servers, and from my tests, I am not sure why, I found that in order for the DHCP servers to appear as unblocked, I also have to restart them. So let's run this command, which will execute restart computer -force on my 2 DHCP servers. And we don't have to wait too long, maximum 1 minute, and they should boot up, and then we can continue. So with everything in place, now we only have to run a scheduled task that will scan again the servers and see if they have been unblocked or not. If we wanted to run it only for one server, for example, we could right click on that server and click on refresh server access status, and you see that the task is running now. And when the task is done, if you refresh, you should see the server as unblocked. If you had a lot of servers and wanted to run with PowerShell, you just have to run this schedule task. And of course, with get schedule task, you can view its state. And now that the task is done, we can refresh again, and you see that all of our servers are unblocked. So now we can actually continue our work. Before we begin and actually use the IPAM tool, I want to also show you the interface. So if you go to overview, you see the screen that we just saw. So if you go through all of these steps, you will have a fully working IPAM environment without using PowerShell, of course. Now if we look below, we see that this is a very simple diagram of our IPAM environment, one IPAM server managing one domain. In configuration summary, we get a summary of our configuration. So the provisioning method that we used, which is a group policy, for example, the scheduled tasks that IPAM uses, and so on. Also, if you want to see the scheduled tasks, they are listed here with their status and the next runtime and last runtime. The next part is server inventory, which we just saw. And here you just get a list of all your servers with different information about them that IPAM retrieves. In the next part, we get to the IP address space management. So here you can manage different things, like for example IP address blocks of ranges. When you click on address blocks, you actually get the IP address ranges view, but you can change it from here to blocks or to individual IP addresses. Anyway, for now we don't have anything, so not pretty much to see. In IP address inventory, we actually get a list of the addresses, so the same thing you would see from this view. And in range groups, you also have these two views that we saw, and also a new one, which is IP address range groups. In virtualized address space, you would see all of the networks that are linked to VMM. We will not use this in this video since I don't have a VMM environment. In monitor and manage, we get to the multi-server management part, where we will have a list, for example, of all of our servers by role. And we can see only the role that we want, if we want to. We also have a list of DHCP scopes. For now we don't have any because we have not discovered them. We also have a list of DNS zones. And in server groups, again, we have groupings of servers by role. In event catalog, you will be able to see different event types like IPAM configuration events, DHCP configuration events, or IP address tracking by different criteria. And in access control, we get to the role-based access control feature that I was talking about in the previous video. And here you can see your roles, your access scopes, and your policies. So that was it for a quick view of the interface. Now let's go and do a couple of stuff so we can get acquainted to IPAM. And the first thing that we should do, or actually, yeah, this is the first thing you should do, is retrieve data from the managed servers. So we can do this either from here or from the server inventory, from tasks, and from here. Let's run this task and wait for it to finish. So now that it finished, let me go back to IP address space and show you that now we have address ranges included in IPAM. So like I said in the previous video, our address ranges could be, for example, DHCP scopes. In our case we have two, even though it's the same one, because we are using DHCP failover, and IPAM unfortunately shows the same scope twice because it's on two different servers. There's no way around this. But what's interesting is that you see we have no address blocks. So we don't have the IP address block from which the range is part of. And since we don't have it, why not create one and see how it would work. Now we could create the address block from PowerShell or from the graphical interface. If we wanted to from the GUI, we just go to tasks and add IP address block. And in the address block we would put here the network ID, the prefix length, the start and end addresses, and I also like to put the last assigned date usually, which is the date that I create the specific object. But I want to use this PowerShell command, which will do actually the same thing. So this is the network ID. The start address is the first one, and the end address is the last address of the block. They don't have to be usable addresses. And the last assigned date is the current date. So if we run the command and refresh, now we see that we have our address block. And you see that already 51 addresses are assigned. This doesn't mean that 51 addresses are in use in my environment. It means that from this block we already have a range that contains 51 addresses, either used or unused. Now that we have our block and we have also two ranges created automatically, let's also create two ranges manually, because the DHCP scope is basically at the middle of the IP address block. So first I will create a new range from the graphical interface, so you see how it works. In network ID we just put the network ID of the network. In prefix length you see that it almost completed it correctly, so it's /24. And in a start address we have .1 because .0 cannot be used, and in end address we have .99 because from 100 is our DHCP scope. Let's set the date and create this range. So now we have another range created. If we wanted to create the range with PowerShell, this is the command to run. And the same, the network ID is the same. The start address for the second range starts from 151 when the DHCP scope ends, and it ends with the last usable address from this range. And basically this is it. If we run the command and then go to IPAM and refresh, you will see that it has been created. With the ranges created, now we get to another important part, the IP address inventory. We can, of course, import IP addresses, but we can also create them from the interface. Let's see all the ways that we could put IP addresses into IPAM. First, let's create an address from the GUI. So add IP address. And the first address that I will place in IPAM is actually the IP of my router. So this is the IP. I don't need to specify a MAC address. The only thing I want to put is the assigned date. And with the power of IPAM, I will also want to create a DNS record. I set the name. Then of course we have to select the DNS zone and the DNS server. I also want to create a reverse entry. And I want IPAM to not just place this data in this database, but go and create the DNS resource. And with this we are done. So we have the router in DNS and in IPAM. Now exactly the same thing can be done also with PowerShell. And here it is with add IPAM address. Now I will add my domain controller. And yeah, these are all the parameters that I used in my command. Run the command and we should see another address. But the most exciting part of IP address management is that we can import addresses from a CSV file. And in my C drive on my server, I have a CSV, which I can show you. And in this CSV, I placed a couple of servers with their information. Also, this file will be available on my GitHub page. And with this, I only have to run this command. And if I refresh, you see that all of my addresses that I use in my environment are now imported. Let's also take a look at the multi-server management part. So if we go to DNS and DHCP servers, we see that we have all of our 4 managed servers here. And for example, for DHCP, I can right click on the CPO1 and do a couple of stuff like edit server properties. And from here I could edit different things. I could also edit on 2 servers at the same time if I wanted to. For DNS, it's not really that much, but we can create DNS zones, for example. We can launch the DNS MMC connected directly to the server. We can, if we refresh, see the DHCP scopes that we have. And again, we see two of them because we have DHCP failover. We can also see reservations, but I don't have any at the moment. In DNS zones, if we refresh, we will see our DNS zones, but I'm not sure why. I think I have to run retrieve server data again. And now it's not the best scenario with warnings, but now at least we have a status for them. And in server groups, again, we just have the servers, either by DHCP or by DNS, or all of them together. And we can see different things in the view part, like for example failover relationships, and we see our relationship that we created in a previous video from this series. One thing that is interesting is that IPAM on 2016 links the IP addresses from the IPAM database to DNS entries from the DNS zones. So if we go to IP address inventory and click on any of the addresses, we can see in DNS resource records that this address has an A and a PTR record. One more thing that I want to show you is the event catalog and the access control. So in event catalog, now we have a couple of events. These are IPAM configuration events. We also have DHCP configuration events. And we also have IP address tracking, which for now doesn't really show anything because we did not have any IP addresses listed to a client yet. But in case you have too many events and they occupy too much space, like I said, you can remove them by going to tasks, to purge event catalog data. And here you specify the category of events you want to delete and a date from which to start deleting them. So everything older than this date would now get deleted from all of the three categories. And now we get to access control, and in access control you see that we have the 9 roles that are already created, but we could create new roles if we wanted to, and we have really a big selection to choose from if you want to give granular permissions on different stuff in IPAM. Also, in the case of access scopes, we only have global at the moment, but we could create new scopes, like for example New York, why not? And now under global we also have New York, and if I wanted to assign New York to something in IPAM, I would just go for example to address blocks, and I can set the access scope to New York, and now this scope would be part of New York, and any policy that I would create for this would apply. And in policies we don't have anything created, but we can create a new policy in which we do the following thing. We set the scope and the role, and if we want to edit, we just edit, we change the role for example, and we keep the scope. And we of course have to select a user or a group for this to work, to assign it to someone. So this was it about IPAM. I hope it was helpful for you. If you like the video, please leave a like and share it. Also consider subscribing, and thanks a lot for watching.